To our viewers watching on PBS in the United States and to all of you around the world, welcome. We begin the day with the war in Ukraine, an improving picture for Russia, a picture of problems for the West. Last week, Ukrainian forces suffered a major loss in the east of the country, retreating from the city of Severodonetsk. Tonight, Russian forces are clearly advancing closer to their goal of taking the entire eastern region, which is known as the Donbass. A tentative sense of calm that had returned to other parts of Ukraine was blown away over the weekend. For the first time in weeks, Russian rockets hit the capital, Kyiv. In the western city of Lviv, rocket attacks sent off air raid sirens 5 times in just 48 hours. Now, this comes as leaders meeting at the G7 summit here in Germany face a double dilemma. Western sanctions against Russia are not denying Putin the money that he needs to bankroll his war. At the same time, those sanctions are fueling global inflation. Voters in G7 countries are staring at cost of living hikes not seen in 40 years. Behind closed doors at the summit, the motto may have been, "Something's gotta give." How much longer will voters supporting Ukraine while their own buying power at home shrinks by the day? We'll try to get some answers in just a moment, but first, this report from the Bavarian Alps.
At this luxury hotel nestled in the Bavarian Alps, talk of war is dominating discussions at this year's G7 summit, specifically options to support Ukraine and expand sanctions on Russia. In a closed-door session via video link, Ukraine's president asked world leaders to help end the war before winter, when conditions would become tougher for his troops.
We all have assured that we will continue to support Ukraine in its defense against Russia. What's clear is that war is a deep, deep cut in international relations. All the rules, all the agreements that we have made with each other, the cooperation of states, all has been broken, especially the understanding that borders should not be moved by force.
The G7 is considering capping Russian oil prices and imposing sanctions on gold exports as a way to further target Vladimir Putin's revenue streams while minimizing spillover effects. The war is already driving up food and fuel prices around the world, as well as inflation rates. Several developing economies have been invited to take part in this year's summit, joining working groups focused on energy and food security.
Well, for more now, we want to bring in Anastasia Fedek. She is a member of Economists for Ukraine, which is a worldwide collective working to support Ukraine and to end Russia's invasion. She's also an assistant professor of finance at the University of California in Berkeley. Professor, it's good to have you back on the day. I want to discuss first the plan that came out of this G7 summit, the plan to hurt Putin where it hurts the most. The U.S. says that the G7 is going to put a price cap on Russian oil. Is that going to work?
Yes, absolutely. The price cap is something that I think is effective, that is necessary, and honestly is long overdue. So our group of economists has been pushing for a price cap for about a couple of months now. It should have been there when the EU was discussing the 6th package of sanctions, as energy prices were rising up while we were debating what will and will not happen, and it still can be effective now. The idea is that the price cap would be able to limit the cash that Putin is receiving for energy without damaging the global supply. And it's something that even kind of third-party or bystander countries can more easily go along with, because if the EU is paying only, say, 50 euros per barrel, would India really be paying 70? No, they wouldn't.
So that's going to allow China and India to continue buying Russian oil correctly. Who gets to decide what the price cap is?
Yeah, so of course, the larger the collective of countries that sign up to the price cap, the more effective it's going to be. But even if it's not everybody that is explicitly implementing the price cap, if it's a large enough part of the world that is implementing the price cap, the other countries will have more bargaining power to pay lower prices for oil, even if they're slightly higher than potentially the price cap.
Do you agree with me when I say that the sanctions, as they have been applied so far since the beginning of this invasion, they have not had the desired effect?
The desired effect, no. Of course, they have had an effect. We do see that the Russian economy is contracting quite a bit. We, of course, see how frustrated Russians, from oligarchs to propagandists, are about the Western sanctions. They complain a lot about them. They launch lawsuits to get out from them. So it has had an effect. It has not had the desired effect, meaning it has not taken away either Russia's desire to wage the war or its ability to wage the war.
You, I'm sure, are aware that the White House has said that Russia defaulted on a bond bill that it was supposed to pay by yesterday. Now, the Kremlin has denied that. What effect, though, we assume it's true, what effect would a Russian default have?
So the main effect of sovereign default in general is limiting or outright removing the ability of that country to borrow in the future, right? So it's just not a credible borrower, people will not lend. So that's the general effect. Now, in the case of Russia, unfortunately, the effect of a default is not going to be that large. Why? Because Russia is already effectively cut off from most of the Western financial system. And autarky for Russia lately has been more of a feature than a bug. They're not that interdependent. They're on kind of deliberately. Also, reputational damage. The default, of course, is reputationally damaging, but not as much as the fact that Russia is waging a genocidal war. So from that perspective, this particular default is not as big of a deal as it would be otherwise.
Finance ministers from the G7 countries, they are providing $20 billion in economic aid to help Ukraine keep its basic services functioning, basically to pay public workers, for example. What kind of commitment is Ukraine going to need long term? Do we know?
Yeah, so I think the current estimates in terms of how much we're going to need in Ukraine to reconstruct and to continue to function are anywhere from $500 billion to $1 trillion. So it is a large commitment long term. At the same time, you have to think about the alternative. So Ukraine is only able to continue fighting the war if it continues being able to function. And if we actually imagine the alternative of Ukraine not being able to continue fighting the war, effectively becoming a second Belarus, a country from which Russia can intimidate others, can launch attacks potentially on others. And moreover, if Russia takes over the resources that are in Ukraine, all of the issues that we're having now would be exacerbated. So we're facing a food crisis now when Russia is just blockading Ukrainian grain. Should Russia actually take over all of that capacity for grain, for energy, everything else in Ukraine, that blackmail potential will just be greater.
Anastasia Fenech from Economists for Ukraine. We appreciate your time and your insights. It's good to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.